I'm so glad I live in a world where there are Octobers. Hi guys, welcome to today's video. I'm so excited to share some fall book recommendations with you. So if you're new here, my name is Chantel and I love reading and talking about books, and today I'm going to share some of my favorite fall books. For me, fall, especially October, it's all about the atmospheric reads. I do like mystery and like suspense, kind of like creepy type books, but it's also about just kind of like feeling cold but snuggling up with your blanket, and I feel like I've done a really good job picking a variety of books that all work really well to be read in fall. I also feel like fall is a really good time to read classics, so I've mixed up some like modern books along with some classics here. So if you're looking for one or the other, I think you'll have a little bit of variety here. We're gonna start off kind of in the fantasy genre, and that is A Mark of a Raven. This one I read last year, and this was my actual first real fantasy book I think that I read, and it like hooked me on the genre, and I just wanted to devour this entire series. In this book and in the series, we follow a girl named Lady Selene who is just becoming the age where she's becoming the head of her house. There are a number of different houses and every house has a different power, and her house power is the ability to dream walk, which didn't seem like that amazing of a power to her until she realizes, once she kind of becomes of age and gets this power, she finds out that instead of using this ability to inspire the people of their realm or whatever, her family has actually been for years using this to assassinate people and using it more of a weapon than anything else, and she strongly disagrees with this. And her mom does end up, telling her to assassinate these people, and it's a struggle. She has to figure out, if she's going to follow what her mother says, or if she's going to follow what she believes. And I was just like soaked up this entire book, read it so quickly, loved it. It felt like creepy and fall, yet I felt like good winds, and I would highly recommend this book and the entire series. It's great for this time of year. Next up is one that I just finished reading and talked about in my last week in review. That is The Reckoning of Gossamer Pond. Based off of this book, I almost think that any Jamie Jo Wright book would be good for the fall. This is the only one of hers that I've read, but they all kind of have like similar vibes, and this cover is amazing. So in this one, this is a dual timeline, which normally I struggle with and don't enjoy, but I really enjoyed this. So we go back to 1907 in the one timeline, and we are following a young woman who works at a newspaper, and she's getting these obituaries sent into her, but the people haven't actually died yet, or like they get sent in the day the person dies kind of thing. So there's that going on, and at the same time in her town there's these revival meetings where these like kind of creepy twins are doing this revival thing, and yeah, it's just like there's a lot going on, and it's kind of like I felt really confused. There's a lot of secrets, and then in the present day we follow a woman who also has secrets of her own, has ties to this family that this other woman has ties to, so she kind of finds out some of the history from 1907, and at the same time she is left, this man leaves her his house trailer, and in it, when he dies, they find like hundreds of pictures of her, and she's never met this man before. And I just soaked this book up. It was so good. I was really reading it one chilly afternoon and just wanted to keep going. It felt like the perfect read for this time of year. Okay, let's do a classic this time. This is a really short classic, and honestly, if you have not read a ton of classics but you want to read more, this is a really good one to start with, I think, because it is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I feel like everyone knows the general story to this, so that also helps when going into a classic, because if it is a little bit more difficult to read, then you kind of have that general idea helping you through. And this book actually it has like an essay in front of or before it. So really the book only starts there, and it's only about 100 pages, maybe even a little less. This is a great story of a guy who is a scientist, and well, we follow his friends really. So he's working on some experiments that are maybe a little more out there, and I don't really want to say too much about it because, I mean, like, if you know the general idea, then you already know the general idea, but if you don't, I think it would be really fun to go into this not knowing, so I'm gonna leave it there. But if you're looking for a classic for the fall, this is a great one. And then if you kind of like the idea of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or if you have read that, or if you read it this year and you want something with like similar vibes, a book that I got out from the library last year and read and really enjoyed, and it's very similar to this, is called The Man He Never Was. And in it we follow a man who wakes up one morning, and he wakes up, I think, in a hotel room and forgets the last bit of his life, I think. So he's married and he thinks like, oh yeah, I gotta go home to my wife now. But in reality, I think we're farther along in the timeline, and his wife, like, they've had kind of a falling out and he hasn't really been living with her or whatever. And so he has to deal with his actions and to kind of change who he is. The book takes a lot of inspiration from Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, so I think they would be really fun to read in tandem, like read one and then the other, or maybe like read them at the same time or something. Because they work so well together, I would highly recommend reading them together. I think because I just read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde this year, maybe next year I hope to like reread them together. If you want a fantasy book for the fall, I think a really good series, and starting with the first one here, is Mistborn. So this is a adult, like Sanderson's adult fantasy series. I mean, one of his, but I misspoke one time and I called it YA, and it's not YA, but it is written very much like it. Like it's easy for someone who doesn't read a ton of fantasy, I don't know, it's like his books are complex, but they're also easy to understand, at least the series. So this is a really good one for like dipping your toes into Sanderson or fantasy. So in this one we have kind of, our main character is a girl named Vin, and she finds out that she has powers, and she's a Mistborn. So there are a couple different kinds of people in here, and they all have different powers based on metals. So a Mistborn has all the powers, but then some people only have like one or two of them. So thankfully Sanderson has a little like cheat sheet here in the back. Unfortunately, I didn't see this until I was done the book. I wish they would put these things at the beginning. But like a lurcher is someone who can pull on metals, and a coin shot is someone that can push off metals. So you can like manipulate metals and coins and send them flying, or send yourself flying based on your powers. And there's also like people that can affect people's emotions, and there's like all sorts of really cool powers. And I really enjoyed this series, and especially this first book was my favorite. Okay, let's go for another classic. And this one's kind of like, do I recommend this one? Do I not? I read this one a couple years ago, and I feel like it needs a little bit of a caveat, a disclaimer. Let's go with that. And that book is Wuthering Heights. Now, let's say this. Wuthering Heights is not meant to be an enjoyable, cozy, warm feeling book. There is a lot of abuse and different things going on in here. It's not pleasant. I actually went into this book thinking I was going to hate it. I got it used. I was like, whatever, I'll try this classic. And I really enjoyed it. I think partly because I went into it not expecting wonderful things. But what I really enjoyed about this book is the way that Emily Bronte wrote her scenes of the English countryside. So this takes place in the moors, which I believe is like northern England. And that's when you have like the rolling hills and, you know, short grass. And she just talks about the wind like whipping through the hills. You know, she writes it much better than I can explain it. And just her descriptions, it felt so atmospheric and so perfect for the fall that I read it in October a couple years ago, and I want to reread it again in the next couple of years, and definitely going to do it in October. I would be completely remiss if I didn't have like a mystery, especially a Agatha Christie mystery on here. So I picked my very favorite one for fall, because if there was a time to pick a favorite, it would be fall. and that is The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. I have probably read maybe like 20 Agatha Christie books so far, and this one is by far my favorite. I don't want to tell you much. It doesn't have as much of a setup maybe as her like Murder on the Orient Express or And Then There Were None, which are maybe her more popular ones. This one, a guy just ends up dead in his study, and like all of her books, you have a cast of characters that one of them is the guilty one, and you kind of have to figure out who it is. And she does give clues throughout the book. You can figure it out, apparently. I can't figure out her books. I don't know who did it ever. But I feel like I was the most surprised by this one, and for that reason, it's my absolute favorite. Let's go completely different note now. But can you have a fall TBR and not do Anne of Green Gables? I mean, I read the quote at the beginning, right? That's Anne. She loves October. And can we just like comment on these beautiful Tundra editions? These are being printed by Penguin Random House Canada, I believe. And so I have a number of L.M. Montgomery's books in this edition, and I'm just planning on collecting them all because I just love them. They're so adorable. Anne, does she really need any describing either? Like, everyone knows Anne. She's a lovable orphan who talks a lot, but she's also feisty. Maybe like she talks too much, gets herself in trouble. I grew up watching the Megan Follows movies, and I didn't actually read Anne of Green Gables until I was an adult. And then I'm thinking this fall, whenever I get Netflix again, I need to like go through and watch the new series, the Netflix Anne series. I've watched like 1 or 2 episodes, and I think the character that they chose for Anne, the person, that actress, is just like spot on perfect. I think Anne of Green Gables is a good one for the fall. I have actually never read anything beyond the first book in the series, so maybe I should do that every October. I should read another book in the series. That's brilliant. Maybe I'll do that this year. Okay, let's go for like a science fiction fantasy recommendation now, and that is Cinder. I don't own a copy of this book. I got it from the library years ago, read the series, and I have yet to buy the series, but I really enjoyed it. I really want to, especially this first book. So if you can't tell from the cover, Cinder, Cinderella, she is a cyborg, and you know, it's a Cinderella story completely told in a very different way. It's been years actually since I've read the series now, but it gave me like vibes of Star Wars and like the new Star Wars with Rey, and the way she grew up and where she lives. Her character reminds me a lot of Cinder actually. And you know, of course, because it's Cinderella, Cinder, she gets involved with a prince, but this one just takes the whole story to a whole new level. I actually would really like to reread this one this fall. Okay, we're gonna go for classics again, and that would be fairy tales, and I mean the original fairy tales. So I have Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales. Like this book only has 12 of them. I'm hoping to read a couple of these this fall as well. I also have the Grimm's fairy tales in this gorgeous edition. I got these from Costco, this one from Costco a few years ago actually. So the original fairy tales were a lot darker than, or are a lot darker than the, you know, Disney fairy tales that I grew up watching. I had no idea. Actually, like here's an additional book recommendation. I recently read Stepsister, which is kind of like follows after what happened to Cinderella. We follow one of the stepsisters, and at the beginning of that book of Stepsister, we find out about the true Cinderella story, where the stepsisters cut off their toes to try to fit into the shoe because their feet were too big. So yeah, like that's gross, that's morbid, but that is like the original fairy tale apparently, because Anne from Elizabeth Ann Reads told me it's true, so I believe her. So this fall I want to read some original fairy tales. I'm gonna pick some of the more well-known ones I think and read the originals, and then in the future hopefully get into some of the less well-known ones. A book that I read earlier this year that I feel like I have not stopped talking about is If I Run, and this entire series. So this is a suspense story where right at the beginning, right like the very first chapter, which I love it when books grip me like that, our main character, she has stumbled across the body of her best friend, And because of the history that she has with the police department, she knows that someone is going to frame her for his murder because he was looking into something for her. And looking into the police department, she knows there's something sketchy going on. And so in this book and the entire series, we follow her as she, you know, tries to figure out like who's behind this. She tries to figure out how to escape. She changes identities. She changes looks so much. I love thinking about that kind of stuff. Like, con artists intrigue me. I would never be one. I always have to like have this disclaimer, like I have way too much of a conscience. I would never do that. But I really like thinking of ways around things. And so when she, you know, goes and dyes her hair and like tries to change her look, I'm like, what color would I dye my hair? What would I do? Like, what name would I take? Where would I go? I really liked thinking about that along with this book. I read this book in the matter of a couple hours, and I had to stop in the middle and like, you know, parent and feed my children and stuff like that. And I just like cruised through this entire series. I feel like there's a very good chance this stack is just gonna like fall over at some point. But I have, I think, 3 more books left here to recommend. Okay, one of them is an ebook, and I read this a few years ago because Murphy kept talking about it, and that is Duel of Fire. So this is a fantasy story. It's actually a series. I did read the 2nd and 3rd books, I think, and the first book was by far the best. So personally, I'm just gonna recommend that one. In that one, we follow a girl, teenager, I think, young woman. I don't remember the details, but her family has the ability, so everything is elements in this book, and her family has powers related to like the elements of fire. And she is a fencer, like not like I'm a farmer and I'm putting up a fence, but like, you know, with the sword, like that. And she ends up having to, like, she's quite good at fencing, I guess, and she ends up training the prince, and things go down between people with different powers and the houses, or whatever the terminology was there. And I was really enthralled. I listened to the audiobook, and I would highly recommend it. It was really gripping, and it was another one that I read in fall, and it just feels like this is the perfect time to read that. Okay, and then we're going for this book, which if you've been on here at all, even though it doesn't have a cover, you probably know what I'm going to recommend, and that is The Oath. So this book is by Frank Peretti. I got this copy from a little free library a few months ago. That's why it's got like no dust jacket. This is a supernatural suspense book that I read in high school. Now, I graduated from high school 16 years ago. So it's been at least 17, 18 years since I read this book. I have vivid memories. I read this book when I was had a candle going, and it was a cinnamon apple scent. And now every time I smell that specific cinnamon apple scent, I like go back to sitting on my bed and reading this book. So yeah, this is supernatural suspense. I don't remember a ton of the details, and I don't want to look too much up because I don't want too much of it to come back to me until I start reading it. But I do know that people, when they sin, I think like it shows in their heart, like their heart is like oozing black, I think. And I think the general idea is this town has a lot of like spiritual oppression going on, and that's really all I remember going into it. That's all I want to know going into it again. But I am like absolutely for sure going to be reading this October again, because it's about time I did. And I make myself like a stovetop potpourri type thing, I don't know what it's called, with like dried apples, dried oranges, cloves, and cinnamon. And I'm going to be like having that on the entire time I'm reading this book because I want that cinnamon apple scent again. Okay, and the last recommendation on this list, I know this is getting a little long, but I mean, like, there's so many good ones, is probably one of my favorite books of all time. Books, it's not really a book, but it's a book, and that is The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. So this is the complete works, the complete Sherlock stories in here. There are a number of different books, and there are some Sherlock short stories, Personally, if you're going to read any Sherlock, my recommendation would be to read the short stories, which I believe they've been written in the memoirs of Sherlock Holmes and the adventures of Sherlock Holmes and the return of Sherlock Holmes. So there's like 3 books, and then those each have like 12 to 15 stories in them, and then each story is only like 10 to 20 pages long. So I mean, I don't have to give Sherlock any introduction. I don't think everyone should know about Sherlock. If you don't, please stop this video and go read some Sherlock. I think my plan for this year and all the years to come is to read a couple of the short stories every year. I've read through all of them before, so the longer ones as well. I'm not a huge fan of the longer stories, but the short stories are like my jam. I mean, if you've been around here, I talk about Agatha Christie a lot. But the thing is, I like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle better. I like Sherlock better. But I've read all of them already, and like, how many times can you reread them, right? So I think my plan is every October just to read a few of them. So I can always have a little bit of that, but not know what's going to happen right away. Like if I were to read all of them every year. So yeah, definitely read some Sherlock this October. Okay, if I put this on the top of the pile, it's probably gonna fall, right? I definitely put the heaviest books on top. Oh, we'll go like that. Oh, there we go. Okay, so there's my list of recommendations for fall, especially October. I'm really excited about this reading season, and I am actually going to be having a readathon in October, not related to these books, but it's going to be a fall readathon. So stay tuned probably for my next video for information on that. If you guys have recommendations for me for October, for the rest of fall, please let me know in the comments below. I really want to just read like all the creepy, cozy, mystery, suspense, fantasy books this fall. And I wish I could reread these for the first time because, oh yeah, just really enjoy those. If you're not already, I would love it if you would subscribe to my channel. And thanks for watching another video, guys.